The Shining, Kubrick's re-envisioning of horror novelist Stephen King's work about a young boy with psychic abilities and his psychotic father locked together in a distant cabin in the woods, is a work of very high art in terms of symbolism. The bush maze, which figures so prominently in the film, was not in the original story by King, and was an addition by Kubrick based on his own selection for a location to film the exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel. Various other discrete discontinuities used in the film that differ from the book substantiate the premise that Kubrick was, again, merely using the storyline as a vehicle for performing his own art as film director, including shot composition, editorial timing, selection of musical score, etc. The character of the psychic child is portrayed as troubled by visions about his father's encroaching psychosis, embodied in his father's having given up drinking alcohol and being tempted to return to the bottle under the conditions of cabin fever, having been snowed in all winter. Kubrick, by adding the bush maze, alludes to the symbolism of the Greek legend of Theseus and the Minotaur. In this myth, Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, the king cursed by everything he touches turning to gold, loved Theseus, and when he volunteered to slay the half-bull, half-man zoomorph, Ariadne provided Theseus with a clue, or ball of twine, to unravel behind him as he ventured through the maze. The similar symbolism of the father character in The Shining to that of the raging Minotaur monster, and that of the psychic son to the beloved hero Theseus, who slew the Minotaur and escaped the labyrinth, should not go unnoticed. Likewise, the polar juxtaposition, perpendicular to the father-son axis, between the Overlook Lodge itself and the bush maze, a relationship of which it is said the only way out is through. In his film adaptation of Arthur C. Clarke's science fiction short story, The Sentinel, about an alien structure being discovered on the surface of the moon and another being found in orbit near a neighboring planet in our solar system, Kubrick presented his own stellar panorama of a future without even gravitational boundaries to audiences during a peak period of public psychedelic drug use, and, again, presented it to them as being a utopian vision motivated by millennialism and optimistically encircling a certain date at the end of the century. Originally, the now iconic monolith was a tetrahedron in Clarke's short story, but as he would again and again throughout his career as an increasingly auteur filmmaker, Kubrick changed this small detail, and by doing so made a massive change to the implied meaning on the symbolic level, the level with which audiences usually connect only subconsciously on first viewing, as they are not given time to consciously rationally analyze symbols during the film itself, which tends to draw audiences back for more. Kubrick's innovative use of front projecting an image onto a distant backdrop allowed for realistic recreation of otherwise impossible location shoots in controlled in-studio settings, and thus the ability to mimic perfect lighting in the foreground. His adaptation of Clarke's 2001 as an epic science fiction predated and inspired George Lucas's Star Wars saga, and although not set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but instead at a nearby place in outer space, at a then not far off date in the future, Kubrick's single feature, 2001: A Space Odyssey, is no less an outstanding example of space opera. The use of science fiction to mythologize futurism, whether utopian or dystopian, and thus to motivate the masses toward one school of practical learning or another, is a propaganda tactic as old as the genre, both having their roots in the late 19th and early 20th century. Kubrick's ability to harness this trend, particularly at a psychedelically peak time, is titanic in the stature of its outcome. His choice for a score to the movie was essentially classical musical compositions, including works by Richard and Johann Strauss, and plays an almost central role in the film, which features long scenes of silence, either consisting of establishing long shots or where the characters are present but do not speak. There is no dialogue in the film for the first 25 minutes, and none for the final 22 minutes, which, since the film is 2 hours and 15 minutes long, leaves only 88 minutes for the plot to use dialogue to develop. Kubrick's use of pacing in his direction of this film is like no other maestro. Three symbols dominate the mind of the audience member coming away from 2001, and the first is clearly the monolith. The meaning of the monolith is also clear. It serves as a transmitting or broadcasting antenna or tower that projects or beams a message from one location in space to another. The first discovery of it by proto-hominid primates in ancient prehistory, according to the plotline of the story, triggered an evolutionary leap in our ancestry's development, allowing one tribe an advantage over others by having a more progressive knowledge of weaponry development. The next monolithic domino to fall into place was discovered, again according to the story's development, buried in dust on the surface of the moon. This piece of the puzzle could only be uncovered once the species, whose development was accelerated by the appearance of the first monolith, had achieved an advanced enough technology to have left their own planet's confines and begun to explore the surrounding celestial bodies, beginning with their planet's own moon. Shortly after this second monolith's discovery, the story proceeds, it broadcast a signal to a third monolith in orbit around another nearby planet. In the novel, it is Saturn, but in the film, Jupiter. The majority of the film depicts, in the context of the story, the manned mission to orbit around Jupiter to investigate the receiver of the moon monolith's transmission, the third and largest monolith of them all. In the sequel novel and movie, called 2010, The Year We Made Contact, more monoliths, appearing as dark spots, begin to appear in the atmosphere of Jupiter, finally bringing about a stellar nova event, causing the gas giant to erupt into fusion and become a second star. The premise of a second sun or twin star to our own sun is an ancient notion, long called nemesis and thought, as recently as the early 20th century, to be a brown dwarf star somewhere just beyond the Oort cloud of cometary asteroidal debris, around 5000 AU beyond Pluto. The myths explaining such a dark star or black sun are indeed ancient, with the Greek Olympic deities undergoing events that were, later, associated by the Romans with the local planets, namely the myth of Aphrodite, Greek goddess of love and beauty, associated by the Romans with the planet Venus, having sprung from the head of Zeus, the Greek god-king, associated with the planet Jupiter. Modern interpretations of Sumero-Akkadian myths expand on this premise even further, explaining the orbit of Nibiru, a planet that circulates between a distant sister star and our own sun, and how, once a long time ago, Nibiru collided with Tiamat, the proto-Earth, and broke off a portion of it to form Kingu, Earth's moon. One modern theory is that the Greek, Egyptian, Sumero-Akkadian, and Vedic pantheons were all describing wars in heaven among ancient aliens. The likelihood this was the intended interpretation by the authors of these myths is not impossible, but is statistically very slim odds. Nevertheless, this theme in modern science fiction not only still sells to audiences, it also leaves them entertained.